Welcome. My name is Larry Dlugosh. I'm a Emeriti Professor in the College of Education and Human Sciences at UNL. It's my honor today to introduce you to the 2014 Distinguished Alumni for the College of Education and Human Sciences, Dr. Roger Breed. Dr. Breed has recently served as Commissioner of Education. Prior to that, he was an exceptional educator, both a teacher and an administrator in the state of Nebraska. So, Dr. Breed, welcome. We're very happy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Larry. It's a special privilege with you being the one doing the interviewing.
Well, I'm honored to do it. First of all, let's get to know you a little better. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Family, hobbies, interests?
Well, I was born in Kansas, just within sight of the Kansas State University campus. My parents are both graduates of Kansas State. Family lived in Kansas for a while and moved up to Lincoln. My father was with State Farm Insurance in 1957. And so I attended for the most of my education through the Lincoln Public Schools, graduated from Southeast, and distinctly remember a conversation my father had with me at that time about where I might attend college, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But married a high school sweetheart when we were both in college at UNL, and have spent the last 45 years in education, public education in Nebraska. Have had a wonderful career and time doing it. My sons are graduates of Elkhorn High School, and both reside in St. Louis area at this time, down in Missouri, with our 6 grandchildren. And certainly being a grandparent is, in our way of thinking, is second only to being an educator in Nebraska.
So you make a few trips to St. Louis?
Not as many as my wife, but I make a few.
Good.
So.
You mentioned you were going to tell me about how you got started at UNL. What led you to UNL and eventually to what was then called Teachers College?
Right. When I was a senior in high school at Southeast, and this is when at that time, this is when you actually got serious about thinking about what are you going to do when school's over in terms of high school. And I had friends that were going to Princeton and Stanford and down to the dreaded KU, which would have never been allowed in our family. So I started talking to my father about this, and Dad finally sat me down and said, Roger, you can go to any major university you want to, as long as it's here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and you share a car with your brother to campus. I've got 2 other sons coming up. It's the best we can do. Go for it. So that was pretty much what got me to UNL. And I didn't object to that. It was obviously we'd been Husker fans since moving up here in the 50s, and been to the Knothole section for games and been around campus at Morrill Hall and different events. I took a algebra summer school at University High School, which is now Hens Lake, which is where Teachers College is located. So that got me here. But my first year, I was intending to be a journalist. I was a journalism major, and also taking Army ROTC and then the general education courses that are required of freshmen and sophomores. And then a couple things happened along the way, and at college they kind of moved me towards teaching. One is at that time in journalism you had to type stories on typewriters, and these were non-electric typewriters with a long keystroke, and my hands kept getting, which are big, kept getting caught in the keys, and so you would be given 5 who, what, where, when, why, and hows, and you'd have to do 5 stories in 15 minutes. Ooh. Well, and they had to be typed. Well, I'd be like on the second sentence of the first story, and the time would be up, and I'd be still pulling my fingers out. I said, okay, this maybe isn't for me, although I enjoyed the intellectual banter of journalism. The reporting aspect probably wasn't going to happen. The Vietnam War was a constant at that time, and all young men of my age were subject to the draft. And so I was thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to have to go into the service, then maybe I'll look at law school. So I maintained poli-sci, political science, and history, and constitutional law, and things like that would get. So my second effort was in that direction. And then as life happens, you know, Judy Linneman, who was going to be a math teacher, and I came together and had been, you know, since high school, and decided to get married, and then decided, well, if she's in teachers college, I ought to be in teachers college, because teacher schedules after school work out well together. So that's what got me into teaching. It wasn't that it wasn't at least in the back of my mind. My mother had been a teacher, and certainly would have been proud, I think, of me going into education.
Well, and so Judy's been a good influence on you all of your life.
Well,
mostly.
I'm glad you're not interviewing Judy, because there'd be some corrections to that gist of events about me being her boyfriend in high school, which she would say, heck no. She would also lay claim that she wrote most of my papers, and certainly was a far better typist than I was.
Well, I know she's an outstanding math teacher.
Yes.
And has been for a number of years.
Well, and she did point out that she was far more marketable in most education markets and school districts than I was, as a social science major, and as certainly as an administrator.
So did the two of you begin your careers in the same school district? Walk us through how your career started.
Well, I graduated, and my first teaching job was in the Lincoln Public Schools at Everett Junior High, down at 11th and C. And I was teaching 8th graders social science or social studies at that time. And really enjoyed that was fun. Middle school kids are fun. And Judy, as a math teacher, but married to me and therefore having to stay in Lincoln, was not able to get a job in 1972 because there were no teaching vacancies at that time in Lincoln. And so she went to work for Outboard Marine Corporation as a sales analyst, because she had a math background. She made more money than I did, but she didn't like it. And I was going, oh, stay with this, I'm looking at, we could do well. But she didn't like it, and so she came back and eventually got hired in Lincoln, and our careers paralleled to that time. When I went from Lincoln to York, she was able to come and teach math in York. When I went back to Lincoln to finish my doctorate, she was able to go back to East High School to teach math in Lincoln. When we went out to Axtell, she taught at a small town 7 miles away in Wilcox, and was essentially the high school math department there. And then back to Elkhorn. She was hired shortly after I was hired to be a math teacher at Elkhorn High School, and she retired from that just a few years ago.
What led you to the commissioner's office? I know you had a very successful career as a teacher and a school administrator. What piqued your interest in that? We were all thrilled, by the way, that it was going to be you. But what moved you in that
Well,
direction?
it was an interesting process. Some soul searching was definitely involved in that. I initially, when Doug Christensen announced his retirement and so on, I did have a couple of people say, well, why don't you? And my response to that was, there's no way that either I would want that or that they would want me. And then you begin to think about it, that I think as a state we were at a critical position, that the wave of accountability and standards and how you best make those effective for schools, because they weren't going to go away, and how you bring Nebraska schools into a standards-based, accountable education process in a way that first of all recognizes the strength of Nebraska Public Schools, which is its teachers. And secondly, I think recognizes the fact that we have smaller schools that are still surrounded, for the most part, by very supportive communities. And that's very different than what I found as commissioner going to other states. In other states, you found the full continuum of quality of teachers, and in some cases, you found publics actively counter to their public schools. And that would be an extremely rare situation in Nebraska. So you begin to look at those things, that I found as commissioner. I hoped I would find when I went through the process of going from no way to, okay, I'll put my name in, but they're not going to, appoint me, because part of the interview process that they said up front, you've got to go meet with the governor. Well, the governor and I are not eye to eye on most anything, so I figured that was, and then I knew a couple of the State Board of Education members, and they also were not people that I would most likely agree with. But I met the department personnel, some wonderful folks that are there and have been there, that were really dedicated, I think, to the same vision and mission that I was. And so I made the decision to try for it, was selected, left a job I loved in Elkhorn. You were in Elkhorn, the history of that community in support of its education. But I'd been there 22 years, 18 as the superintendent. And there does come a time in any job that you're going, I can sit here in September and tell you exactly what I'm going to be doing in April at this job. And you have to ask yourself, as you get to be our age, is that all there is? Is that, or do you want to do something more? And so I took it as a challenge and as a duty, and really enjoyed it. But I said I would only do it for 3 to 5 years, so I did it for 5 and have moved on to the next passage.
Good for you. Yeah, I have always followed your career, and I know what you say about Elkhorn. It's a tough place to leave. I mean, that's a growing district that has a lot to offer.
I'm the chair of the Education Citizens Committee for Education, working on the bond issue in Elkhorn. Can I put a yard sign in your?
Yeah, it won't do much good in Lincoln.
Well,
but
we'd like you to come on up then and vote.
Well, I'll do that. Let's talk a little bit about what you saw as commissioner. It put you in a national spotlight, so you were able to meet with a lot of other state commissioners, plus others on a national level. In your opinion, is the American education system, the public education system, still reliable and sustainable?
I think without a doubt. Without a doubt. One of the, just like when you're the commissioner of the state of Nebraska, one of the most enjoyable things was to go out and travel and visit, to see what is actually happening in schools, not headlines, not statistics, but actually walk through the hallways, visit with the kids, visit with the teachers, visit with the parents. And I went to 180 different school districts in Nebraska, 200,000 miles on my car during that time. And then along with that, to visit states and communities and schools that I had never had a chance to go to or see. Very large, very small, from rural schools in Colorado and Wyoming to the Hartford, Connecticut's, the Cleveland, Ohio's, the Cincinnati, Ohio area, and so it was gratifying to see that. And I think by and large, schools are inhabited by people trying to do the right thing. By and large, communities are supporting their schools to do the right thing. But by and large, we're in a rapidly changing world and environment, and the school as an institution does not lend itself to rapid change. And so we have to accept what we can do and do well in schools, and we have to not get flustered by the idea that we can't change every year, because we simply don't have the resources, nor do we have the true direction that we should be going, other than the whims of politicians and others that would have us change every year. And so I think a real respect, I think, for educators that come to the job every day as teachers and administrators and try to translate what they do into the best for our future. And it was pretty cool to be with that process. So, and there's a whole other story that we'll have to talk about later about the other commissioners and superintendents of public instruction across the United States that I met with. Because, it was very clear that on the one hand, there were the educators like myself that came out of the classrooms, out of the school buildings, and who really, I think, understood the education process. And then there were appointed chiefs that were, I don't know where they came from. They were politicians, they were lawyers, they were professors, they were, business owners, they were military people. With, their experience was that they were once in school. And it was interesting because we at times would meet and we'd be talking at this level and they would be hearing at this level. And that was a real difficult thing to provide a common policy across the 50 chiefs of the United States.
I'll bet it was. And I think a lot of people are unaware of the vast difference in the people who occupy the commissioner's
role. What was interesting was to find out that behind those commissioners that came out of areas other than education, there was somebody in their departments that was a lot more like me. And the key was to find that policy person, and that's who we would tend to build relationships with and communicate with, because they were actually doing the work.
And it's a good thing.
And it's a good thing. Yeah, Virginia is a classic example of that. So,
you mentioned transitions, that education is in transition. I think so many things are in transition in this country and the world right now. You've seen a number of changes in your career as an educator. Would you be able, could you talk to us about 3 major changes that you think have really impacted education in either a positive or negative way?
Sure. The one I point to is the one closest to the classroom, I think, and that is not only the expectation, but the resources committed to the idea that teachers should be in the process of teaching in collaboration with other teachers. That the idea that here's your kids, here's your classroom, open the door, toss you in, toss the kids in, toss the books in, and close the door and come back and check on you in a few months, I think is gone. And it's a good thing it's gone. I witnessed in my time in education a real transition from that sink or swim, teacher by themselves philosophy to the idea that we hire you to work in a team of teachers with a group of kids to bring about the best result. Borrow, learn from, support from, interact from, collaborate with those teachers. Here's the time and the resources to do that. And guess what? We get a far better result. We get a far greater satisfaction of teaching when teachers are in it together. It wasn't an easy process for some of us old dogs, that we weren't really trained that way. We weren't really expected to think that way. But, the new teachers coming out today, from this institution and other, are just outstanding at it. They want to be a part of a team. They want to have that collegiality that we would only sometimes find in our experience. So that's one thing, and I think a most important and significant change. The second one is, let's accept the fact that there's going to be accountability, and try to make it work in ways that are positive for teachers and kids. and try to make it a conversation about what our successes are, how we're getting there, and what resources we need to either maintain or do better than that. And not just to beat up schools or beat up people or beat up kids that really can't help where they come from, and to understand that that's not going to go away. It's all across society in terms of levels of expectation and accountability. Mm-hmm. So not resist that, because we resisted that greatly. I'm a teacher. How can I be challenged? How can I care about kids? And the reality is every teacher feels that way. Every educator feels that way. Every parent feels that way. But we still have to measure ourselves as making progress. So that's a second thing, is making accountability work for the good purposes of school. The third thing is somewhat the negative. And the negative is the for-profit privatization of education efforts, whether they're called charter schools or Teach for America efforts, or any of a variety of initiatives about schools or schooling that come from a for-profit, whether they're run by nonprofits or for-profits, for-profit entities, I think has harmed the fundamental idea that this should be public education. And public means all of us. It's not somebody else. It's not them. It's not those people over there. It's all of us as public want the best for all children, because that is indeed, no matter how we cut it, how we face it, it is our future to do well with our kids in school. And so I'm troubled by what I see happening in those areas.
If you, there are going to be a lot of changes from this point on. If you were in a position to make one of those changes, what would be a change that you would like to see occur in public ed?
In public education?
Mm-hmm.
The most significant change, I think, is some way of providing our teachers with what I did get a chance to go to China. I did get a chance to visit in some other areas and to meet some people from Finland and meet some people from Korea and South Korea and some other areas, and talk about, at a fundamental policy level, their education efforts as compared to ours. And there's trade-offs in everything, but one of the things that was pretty consistent with those is that teachers' workload was such that it built in the idea of planning, preparation, thoughtful reflection about what they were doing. That isn't a commonly perceived way that we schedule for or pay for the services of our teachers. A lot of people think, well, teaching, that's pretty easy. That's 9 to 3 and 9 months, 8 months, 8.5 months a year. You get summers off and everything else. Well, I live with a teacher and have for quite some time, and she just finished a 4-week full-time substitute for a friend of hers that was on maternity leave at Elkhorn High School. And I can assure you, she left at 7, she came home at 5, and she stewed and worked on it till 10:30 when we fade. And got up the next day and did it again, and did that for the entire time, plus the weekend times that she was subbing. And I don't think that was an extraordinary effort. I think that is a pretty common effort of most of the teachers that I've ever met or worked with here in Nebraska. And so some way of providing a reasonable load so that teachers can have the time to really do the job well. Because I think one of the greatest delimiters of what teachers can do or not do with kids is their time. And so some way of looking at that, I think, would be a benefit.
That's interesting, because they don't have a lot of time. And they may have a planning period,
Period.
but generally that's pretty short.
So math teacher at a high school, you have 135
That's
kids.
right.
You know, so divide your planning period, which is 54 minutes, by 135 and see how many seconds you can donate to each child.
That's right. Not very many.
Not very many.
I assume that if you had it to do all over again, you would.
I don't think there's any question about it. You know, Judy and I, even when she was going through the toughest days of her substitute, which, you know, by the way, impact the person at home as much as they do the person at the teaching job, because she'd come home and recount the days, and then she would go through the list of things that she'd given me to do and find out that I hadn't done much. But you know, we were so blessed, I think, to have a career that paralleled each other, that we lived literally in the world of children, and you know, very thankful for that.
Yeah, excellent. Anything you want to add that we haven't covered so far?
Well, we haven't talked much about the institution of the university, and you know, it has been a central focus for Judy and I. All of her graduate hours, my master's degree, my doctorate, the 2 years I worked at the Career Planning and Placement Center when I was getting my doctorate for mean old Fred Wendell. You know, those were just, you know, unbelievably supportive times. You and I shared on more than one occasion a late evening at a local establishment that will go unnamed to protect the innocent. But the conversations there were serious conversations about teaching and learning. They were serious conversations about how principals can impact that and how superintendents can impact that. And you know, I think the commitment of the university to provide our state with teachers and leaders has been a significant part of my career.
Good point. People probably didn't realize there was a Starbucks in Lincoln when we were getting our graduate
Is that what it was called?
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
And it was open very late at night.
Yes, it was a late Starbucks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can see why this person has served so well as not only our commissioner, but as an educator and a professional working with students. We've been very fortunate to have had him as a mentor and a friend and an educator. And Roger, congratulations on your award.
Thank you, Larry.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome.